Welcome, everybody. This is the first 2023 session of GetPRDone Zoom sessions, and we're looking forward to this. Our guest is, just to tell you, GetPRDone, by the way, is a cross-party group. As Neal Lawson said, we're sort of the street fighters of the pro-PR movement. We just go out there and raise hell all the time. And we're completely independent. We don't give a fuck what your Stammer thinks. We're just out there to win the people over to PR. And that's what our group's all about. And so we're going to start off tonight's session with a thing on Win as One, which is a new campaign by Compass. And our guest is Neal Lawson, the executive director of Compass. Neal was our guest a year ago, a half ago, really good session. We talked about the 1997 tactical voting campaign that got Blair in. Now, it's not quite on the scale of what's being anticipated for 2024, we assume, but it was a really good session. Neal goes way back to Gordon Brown, the Labour Party, blah, blah, blah. But now he heads up Compass, which is, well, a pressure group, a lobbying, a think tank, whatever, that works on issues with democracy. And I really respect Neal because through thick and thin, Neal keeps raising the PR banner. I mean, in the piece he did in The Guardian, the headline was, there's no point in Labour winning if we don't change the voting system. And that's completely right in line with the views of GetPRDone. We're a single issue group. We just want to do what it says on the tin, is GetPRDone. And tonight then, Neal is going to be interviewed by Katie Neame. Hi, Katie. Thanks for being here. Katie is a senior reporter for Labour List, which comes out pretty well every day and a few sometimes other times a day. Everything Labour. They just are right there, and I read it every day. And I really like it because it's not too sucky like some party publication. It's not an official party publication, but they don't mind having criticisms of the leadership, of what things happening, how come Labour isn't supporting the strikes. They'll look at all that kind of stuff, and it's really refreshing to see that. And they've been a big supporter of PR. I'm really promoting it. Last year, Neal said maybe. Anyways, so without any further ado, I just want to read one quote out to people. The book that sort of caught the country by storm is Prince Harry's book called Spare. And in that, at the beginning of the book, in the epigraph, Harry quotes the American author William Faulkner, who said, "The past is never dead, it's not even past." And sadly, that's what we face in the voting system. We're still voting in a voting system that essentially got created in 1884, which is a great weight on our head as we try and move into the next century. So over to you, Katie. Katie's got some great questions.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, and thanks so much, GetPRDone, for having me. It's great to be here this evening. Yeah, so basically kick off, Neal. It'd be great to just get a bit of an introduction on the Win as One campaign, sort of the context behind it and what the campaign is aiming to achieve.
Fabulous, and thanks for having me, GetPRDone. As Alan and all of you know, I'm a huge fan of the work you do, and try to give you every encouragement, and will continue to do that. And also a huge fan of Katie and Labour List, who I don't think have a line on PR. Katie can tell us that, but they're really good space for the Labour Party to have, from very far left in the Labour Party to very far right. It's a really, really invaluable space, and and an awful lot of work goes into it, and we should applaud them and support them where we can. And thanks for Katie being here tonight. So maybe we'll get into some of the more detail of it. But so Compass has arrived at the eventually at the position where we think that democracy, and in particular PR, is a first order issue. The Compass is about a good society, one which is more democratic, but crucially more equal and more sustainable. And we got to a position where we just don't believe the big transformation to a good society is possible under first past the post. This is no longer a luxury issue. It's no longer an additional issue. It is literally, as we say, a first order issue. We are not going to get the big things that we want without PR. That doesn't mean to say that PR magically transforms you into a nirvana, some sunlit utopia. What it does is the linchpin, it's the logjam issue, which begins to enable us to democratize more elements of our society and our economy, and begins to open up deeper, more radical democratic reforms. And we don't just mean putting go faster stripes on Victorian democracy, but introducing new forms of democracy, liquid democracy, because our answer to everything, really, just as the right answer to everything is marketize it, really kind of our answer, not quite everything, but broadly, the spine of our argument is democratize it. If you want a more equal society, if you want to end climate chaos, if you want long-term, address long-term issues like social care, the NHS, you name it, the tech revolution, we've got to have a democracy which brings people into the process of sharing that, those problems, those challenges, a future, as we say, which is negotiated, not imposed. And PR opens up the possibility of all of that. So we've arrived at the fact that that is a central issue, and without that, we can't do the things we want. That's why we focused on it. And Winners One, maybe we'll get into more detail, Katie, is an attempt to wrestle with the problem that we need to both change the government and change the system. It's, of course, we need a new government. Labour people want, a Labour majority government. We're slightly more relaxed about that, as long as it's a progressive centre-left government. But it's got to be one which will change the system, because if it doesn't change the system, it will just hold the fort while the Tories regroup and then come back in again. And we can go into the details of why we all want PR, and maybe we can extend that conversation a bit more. But Winners One is an attempt to put votes, activism, and money behind those candidates who will be a change of government, but will also change the system. And in all of that, the dilemma is that we don't want to split the vote amongst progressives, which is what happened before. But neither do we want to just back candidates who aren't going to change the system. So we're seeking out those candidates who will help us change the government, but will also be advocates and agents for changing the system. And that's primarily around PR. Now, people might have some detailed questions about that, but it's trying to make that compromise. We've got to change the government, but we've also got to change the system. We'll back those candidates who will do both of those things.
Great. That's really interesting. And so in terms of, it launched in December, what steps has the campaign taken so far, and what's the response been so far?
So we recognise, I'll be absolutely honest about the campaign and where it's at, because it was conceived in a different moment. It was conceived in a moment, post 2019, when you looked at the electoral ruins and tried to, it looked very tough for Labour. Now, clearly, the polling position has changed, considerably since that, and we've got to be honest about that. And so our argument and our framing has always been, this is necessary in principle, but it's probably also necessary in practice. And there's a balance between those two arguments about winning and changing the system, because it's the right thing in principle to do. And we've got to focus, as much on the principle as we have the practice. Now, we've all got our crystal balls, and we can all gaze into the polling future and try and guess what's going to happen. My guess would be that, Labour's lead will close and will narrow, but it may not. The Tories may continue to kind of self-harm and give victory to the Labour Party, with very little effort on their behalf. Maybe they'll do that. I rather suspect they won't, and their instinct for survival and holding on to office will kick back in. It already has a bit with them, obviously, getting rid of Truss for Sunak. But my guess would be that the polls will close. There'll be a slight uptick in the economy in some respects. It may not happen, but that's my guess. We can debate that. Economic competence is always really important. It may be that this is just a time for change moment. Those once, every 15, whatever years, where the country just goes, it's kind of, fed up with what's going on. Let's see. The polling that we did around the launch of Winners One, we asked the question of the public, why has Labour got a 20% lead? And 63% said it's because the Tories are doing badly, not because Labour's doing well. And I think we'd all recognise there's a lack of definition around the party, its sense of vision, its programme, etc. Now, that may not matter if it is kind of time for change and things shift. I was schooled in 1997 in the run up to then, and that was a really serious political project, with lots of sharp corners to it and angles and, depth to it. And the different thing, the other different, and I don't think Labour's got that now. As we discussed on the last a year ago, there was also much greater collaboration between the parties, at least at the top. And the other thing was that 1997 was an incredibly benign circumstance. There were no big distributional problems, 60 consecutive quarters of growth. Climate chaos was not an issue, really, on the agenda. This is completely and utterly different. This is Ukraine, climate chaos, real distributional questions about who gets what, and so therefore governing in those circumstances requires a bigger, bolder, braver, more nuanced, more in-depth project than 94 to 97. So I look at the current circumstances and think, this isn't anywhere near as advanced political project, and the circumstances are much, much tougher. Now, that doesn't mean to say that Labour can't get over the line first. And I think we need to be, as a PR campaign, we need to be ready both for the hung parliament situation, and Labour getting over the line first, and finding governance really, really difficult. Because if you haven't thought through all the issues and you haven't thought through all the programme, the strategy, the alliances, the agency, the movement, the steps you need to take to govern effectively, so that you're not just holding the fort while the Tories regroup. We need to do all of that thinking, of which PR is a huge element, because that suggests a very different form of politics, a different, pluralism, alliance building, long-termism, etc. And then so what are we going to do between now and the election? We're going to run a series of campaigns about why PR in particular works for a more equal society. What's the link between PR and social justice, particularly around the cost of living, and what's the link between PR and ending climate chaos? And we'll probably look at 2 or 3 other campaigns, maybe kind of housing, maybe social care. We've got to decide on those. And that's driven by the other bit of the report when we published, the one we published in early December around the launch. We threw up that really interesting stuff about, not just is the first past the post unjust, it's how it skews the whole debate against progressive politics. And the example that we put in there was one around immigration, that broadly the country is split, divided about whether it thinks immigration is a good thing or a bad thing. But because all the pro-immigration votes are stacked up in a relatively few number of seats in London, Cambridge, Manchester, the other cosmopolitan areas, it means the politicians ignore those voices, despite the fact that it's 50% of the country. So it's not just it's unfair and unjust and gives more seats per vote to the Conservatives, etc. It skews the whole nature of debate because of the vote distribution. So, we want to make that case. And that if you're a campaigner to end climate chaos or for net zero or against, rising inequality and poverty, that you have to also recognise that democracy and PR is a first order issue. So how do we get all of the progressive community behind PR? And then the other bit of our work is to build up our local groups in all the key seats that matter, so that locally we can deliver on that votes, activism, money, in as much support as possible and as little competition as possible, so that we don't end up with the same number of 62 tragedies that we did in 2019, where the progressive vote was bigger than the regressive vote, but we lost because our vote was split. So it's campaigns around big issues and local seat and group work to affect the outcome of the next election.
Great. And then in terms of practical steps that people can take to get involved at a local level, what will people be looking at there?
Yes, there's a whole range of stuff, and if you go on the winnersone.org.uk website and sign up, there's lots you can do. If there is a local group, you can get involved in that. If you want to set up a local group, you can do that. There's various petition, letter writing. There will be lots of training for people around activism, and we'll run the same sort of barnstorms that we've done before, where we train people very quickly to get up to speed, to get involved and to be active. And so that wherever you are in a country, if you're near to one of our 62 tragedies or one of the marginal target seats we're going to go for, that's great. You can get involved locally. If you are more remote and want to be more remote, what can you do in terms of phone banks, in terms of helping organise other volunteers, et cetera. There'll be a whole list of things that people can do between now and the election, and then in particular during the election as well.
So obviously there's various parties that you'll want to be involved in the campaign who are in different positions electorally, so the Lib Dems, the Labour Party, the Greens. How will the campaign look to appeal to these different groups of voters?
Yeah, so I mean really, in all honesty, the campaign's a campaign about the Labour Party, because it's the Labour Party and their candidates that we need to shift over. Let's just come back to the Labour Party. So this is a campaign aimed at England and Wales. We're not touching Scotland, and people can ask us why not, but given the SNP's position on PR, it's just too much of a kind of, and the cross-current issue of independence, it's kind of too complicated and too difficult to get into. All Liberal Democrat candidates will back PR, obviously, so we don't have to worry about them and where they're the best placed challenger to the Conservatives. And the great thing about 2019, it made the kind of who's second place challenger pretty clear. There's a few places where it isn't clear, and where that where that doesn't kind of Labour on Liberal Democrat competition, where there's no chance, like Sheffield, of allowing the Conservatives in. Our kind of view was, well, okay, we'll let the best candidate win and let the parties fight that out there. And our local groups will probably back the if both candidates support PR, great, there's nothing we need to do. If one does, then I'm guessing that our local group would back the candidate who supports PR. But there are very few of those seats across the country, and hopefully we can make sure that even where, because Labour obviously historically and probably at this election will stand candidates in every seat, even where they stand, we can make sure that through tactical campaigning they'll do as little as possible. And then in terms of the Greens, who are, important in terms of their activism and their reach, and frankly, their ability to create more progressive tragedies, I think we need to, that's one of the things we need to look really hard at. Are there seats in which we can help the Greens do really well? If that could be a new seat. It could be a seat where neither Labour nor the Liberal Democrats are really contesting, and can we really pile in behind the Greens, because that massive injustice to their party of 800,000 votes per Caroline Lucas compared to whatever it is, 35,000 votes per Jacob Rees-Mogg, is so awful. And I've really only the last few years got to grips with how badly the electoral system treats the Greens, because it's not just every election that they get done over, it's even the run up to, because obviously their people vote tactically because they've got good hearts and want to change the government, so they back other candidates and not theirs. And then that kind of reinforces at a national level, it reduces their vote share and therefore the perceptions of their impact, and locally they don't go from third to second to become challengers in the future because their people keep on doing the right thing. And now there's certainly in the hierarchy of the Green Party, quite understandably, there's a move to say we've just got to stop doing this because, Keir Starmer's not committed to, and the Labour Party aren't committed to PR. This rotten system that treats us so badly and is abusive of us and every other fair-minded progressive voter who wants to change the government, but also wants to change the system, they're kicking back against that and saying, look, we're going to stand, in as many places as we can, and we're going to do, we're going to run as hard as we can. Now, there's a real dilemma in that because you end up, you could end up with another Conservative government, and the Green Party don't want that, I know, but they do have to change the system. And winners won in a sense is a trying to, find a way around that. So we're keen to find ways that we can help the Green Party, whether it's in seats or whether it's using kind of tactical voting and vote swapping to make sure that the total vote, the national vote for the Green Party, if I live in Southwark, it's Bermondsey, it's now a safe Labour seat. Should I vote Green in order to keep their? I won't say I'll do that. That's not to be recorded and say I'm going to. That was a question as opposed to a statement before they throw me out of the party. Do Labour supporters think about that in order to get the Green national vote up? Even if that doesn't win them another seat. And so there's a whole number of considerations like that we've got to go through to try and make sure that the benefits of the next election are evenly spread and don't just accrue to the Labour Party. And Labour's working assumption organisationally will be these people have got nowhere else to go. It's us or the Tories. Everyone will vote for us. Now, quite a lot of people will do that, but I kind of detect that lots of people are no longer prepared to hold their nose. But let's see about that. And we're trying to find an option that's better than holding your nose.
It's an admirable aim.
But it's tricky because of the bastard electoral system, which puts you in this position that, and what we're trying to do, obviously, is, as everyone on the call wants, is this is a once only thing. Obviously, as soon as you've got PR, you don't have to hold your nose and everyone gets a fair vote. But how do you hack the system to get to that point? That's what we're trying to, unlock and expose and do.
So saying the campaign is successful, you get this parliament that are in favour of PR. I know the campaign is not specifying a form of PR that it would campaign for, but I was wondering if you had a personal preference, what kind of system you think would suit the UK?
So quite a lot of work behind the scenes is being done on this by the good thing is that the kind of pro-PR lobby is being pluralistic and collaborating and cooperating much more effectively than I've ever seen in my political life, which is both necessary, important, and encouraging. And us, along with Labour for New Democracy, the internal Labour Party campaign, the ERS, Make Votes Matter, are thinking about systems and about what we're calling the road to PR. So on the Friday, whatever the outcome is, have we thought through both the process, how would you legislate for this? And that opens up all the questions of referendums or not, or constitutional conventions or not, trying to work on any wording in the Labour Party manifesto that gives this as much cover as possible. And none of that is easy. But if we've thought through the scenarios and what the road to PR legislation, timing, et cetera, so that work is ongoing. And there's more looking at systems, and I'm not a systems expert, and originally my view was that some mixed member system would be the most amenable to the Labour Party. And so therefore probably the preferable one, and we know it kind of broadly works in Germany, and we know it broadly works in Scotland. But as I've begun to look at it a bit more closely, there are real implementational problems with a mixed member system, because it means changing everything. Because in order to get no more MPs than you've got now, you've got to have kind of 2/3 elected on constituency basis, and then a third topped up via a PR list system, and the issues around that. but that means changing every boundary in order to do that, or otherwise, if you add a top-up list on the whatever it is, 650 MPs that we've got, then you end up with 900 MPs, and I don't think anyone's going to wear that. So therefore, is some sort of STV thing, more doable? And I'm not. Don't quiz me on this. You can make your points, but don't ask me detailed questions on this because in terms of when people come in, because I don't know the answer to that. I'm just exploring it. But we decided as Winners One that it was too complicated for us to be advocating a system. We just want a parliament. We want to help deliver a parliament which is capable and willing of passing PR legislation. The exact nature of that PR system to be decided, after the event.
So in terms of focusing on the Labour Party, there's been a lot of discussion recently over constitutional reform, so Gordon Brown's commission on the UK's future, and then obviously Keir Starmer's speech last week about a take back control bill, sort of reforming the UK's democracy. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on the general policy direction of Labour in this area. PR has not massively come up as a topic of conversation.
Yeah, and I'll try and answer that as best I can, and then go into some of the reasons, why I think it's problematic for the party still, or some in the party. So I think we would all welcome the broad thrust of the Brown Commission report in terms of trying to look at some of these issues in more detail, in a more systematic way, and go, all of that's necessary. But definitely, we would all say it's not sufficient because it didn't have PR as part of it, and Brown said that he was told that wasn't within scope. Why it wasn't within scope? Well, because let's be absolutely honest, there's a real problem at the heart of the Labour machine about attitudes to PR, despite the fact that Keir Starmer said, he kind of gave it an 80% thumbs up during his leadership campaign, where he said we've got to look at the representation of people and the injustice was first past the post. And then clearly we've had this sea change within the membership of the Labour Party, as we saw at party conference. And that sea change is interesting because it isn't just Labour can't win, it needs to do a deal, and PR's the route, the only route that we can win, because when Labour passed that legislation, I think that motion at conference, it was 20% ahead in the polls. And that conversion within the rank and file and membership of the party is on the basis this is in principle the right thing to do. If it's a party of social and environmental justice, it has to be a party of democratic justice too. And that tells me this is a deeper and abiding kind of switch amongst the party. What I also find really interesting, Katie, is that there are some prominent figures around the edges of the party who are converting to PR. And if you look at people like John Gray, the New Statesman, if you look at Giles Fraser, another kind of communitarian bluish Labour figure, or kind of more mainstream, people like Peter Kellner, the pollster, these are all recent, and quite important converts to the PR case. And that mixture of the movement with some of the unions, the party membership, and these sort of opinion former figures tell me something big is going on, but still at the heart of the Labour machine, we have to recognise that, there's a number of reasons. There's a kind of there's a kind of technocrat kind of thing within the Labour Party. We're the best able people to know what everyone else wants and to administer it and run it, and just give us control over the levers of power, and we'll do a good society, for people and to people, which is a very kind of, old Fabian top-down paternalistic view of politics. There's a kind of pragmatic look. It's not really a serious agenda on the doorstep. It may be something down the line. Why are we fussing about this? We just need to get in. And then decide what we're going to do. And then finally, there's a real kind of tribal, why on earth would we introduce competition into the electoral system? First past the post guarantees at worst second best. His Majesty's opposition, I forget myself, short money, prestige, position, absolutely guaranteed. No way anyone else can make a breakthrough. There's never in a million years are we going to give up that position, or at least threaten us losing that position by having a political, a voting and democratic system which introduces meaningful competition into the political process. And a mixture of those views, I think, are held the further up, the hierarchy you go, both within Parliament and certainly within the bureaucracy of the party. And that's why they're just ignoring, the conference vote. That's why it was ignored in Brown. And it's why I think they'll try and keep it, in the long grass for as long as possible. So the question is, can the work of Labour for a New Democracy work internally to push this as hard as possible? And can people like us, Compass, GetPRDone, Make Votes Matter, and a host of other people change the context, the external context, to put the pressure on to make this happen? And does that coincide with an electoral outcome which, makes all of this not just desirable but feasible? Clearly, if Labour gets some stonking huge majority, you can probably, write this off for another 10 years, because it'll, my guess is that Labour will be in for a little while, but not long, because it won't get the sort of mandate or have the energy of 97, and then the Tories will be back in again. But anything short of that, have we got all of that, the external argument, the internal pressure, etc., to, with a slimmer majority or no majority in hung Parliament, to prosecute this as effectively as possible? And have we thought through all the moves?
Katie, can I just jump in for 1 second? Just to tell people, I am monitoring the chat line. Put your questions there, and please, no one put their hand up, because this gets too distracting. Put it in the chat line. I've already picking out questions when the interview is over.
Yeah, Alan, I was watching the time, so I was probably going to ask one more question, and then should we move on?
Sure.
Yeah, so I was really interested by the discussion about how our current electoral system kind of shapes policy direction. And so obviously there's been a certain amount of criticism of Keir Starmer not taking a more radical stance on various policy areas. And I was wondering how you think the current political system has impacted his policy, essentially, and how much and how so.
I think this is the kind of central debate in and around the party up to the election, Katie, which is that these kind of two views, one is, look, we've just got to win, to stop mucking around with all these fancy Dan ideas of, democracy and whatever. We've just got to get the Tories out and get our people in. And I'm like, I'm a Labour Party member. I'm massively sympathetic to that at one level. It's just, I just don't think that is anywhere near. It's necessary. It's just nowhere near sufficient. And I think we need a much bigger conversation about how we, what we're governing for, and how do we govern effectively for the long term. Because I think this is like a version of 1945. I think that a mixture of cost of living, growing inequality, climate chaos, global events like Ukraine, who knows what's around the corner in terms of Taiwan and, whatever else, the kind of, the technological revolution, the aging, population, the social care crisis, the immigration crisis. There are all these kind of, perma multi-crisis events going on. And we've still got this old, rusted adversarial, way of doing short-term way of doing politics, and I just don't see how it's going to work. I just don't, and the beneficiaries of that are going to be, the populist right, because people will give up on democracy if we can't refashion it in a way that's going to work, and puts food on the table and stops the water lapping at their door, and gives them sort of dignity in old age. They're going to turn to, the populists to give them answers. I think, in terms of Keir, I think I don't want to be the leader of the Labour Party. Who would want to be? It's such a bloody difficult job. On one level, you've got to say he's, in 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is, he's done remarkably well. He's turned a big poll deficit into a big poll lead. He's made the Labour Party at least, at the very least, competitive and looking like, quite electable, and that's some achievement. But I say it's necessary but not sufficient, and how do we break out of that logjam of him being fixated on, just the red wall or just a few swing voters in a few swing seats, because that is the kind of politics of ever decreasing circles that you never break out and get to do the transformative stuff, because you're always paying lip service to those swing voters, those red wall people, and more than anything, the elites that can manipulate first past the post and a heavily centralized political system. We've got to break out of that, because we'll never do the things that the vast majority of people in the Labour Party want to do, and so that to me is real kind of pragmatic politics of winning, but winning in a way that doesn't build a cage out of your victory, and incrementally builds up the arguments, the ideas, the forces that we become more radical over time. Not that any falling over the line first election just then dissipates and we can do a bit for a while, but we lose our power and our energy. Is how do we have a politics which continues to organically build up our ability to do more and transform more and change more? And I just think that has to be done now in alliances with other people, in order for it to be embedded, for it to be consensual, for it to be long term, which is what we need it to be.
Yeah, really interesting, really interesting. Alan,
I'm all ready. I'm all ready to go. And so when I call your name out, then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, the first one is Sean Hagan at 7:35. Sean, are you there?
Yeah, oh God. Yes, I'm here. Yeah, I'm here.
Thanks, Sean. Go for it.
I'm trying to remember exactly what the question was, but I think I remember the outline of it. Yeah, in specific constituencies, how will the Winners One campaign decide which candidate to support? For instance, where Labour was placed second at the last general election, but in the absence of any manifesto pledge by Labour to PR, the Labour candidate also fails to give any personal commitment to system change. What would happen then? What the strategy is, Sean, is to then is to lobby that person and say, here are votes, here's activism, and here's money for you, as pressure to back PR. If they refuse to do that, then we're saying, well, we'll take our activism and our money elsewhere, and we'll leave it up to individuals to decide whether they want to hold their nose and vote for you or vote for the person behind you who does back PR. So we're not going to advocate splitting the vote because we think that's a disaster. But we're not going to actively support candidates who don't want to change the system and who want to perpetuate the injustice of first past the post. So that's the basis of the decision.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I thought that was broadly what the strategy would be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll just have to go through these fairly quickly. James Doran. James?
Hi, my question was about the trade union movement. Is it likely that, just as some unions have come out for a PR, that they would come out for the Winners One campaign?
I think we have to kind of, again, I'm going to be brutally honest, because I don't think there's any point in not doing that amongst friends. I mean, I think it's brilliant the way that Unite and Unison have have moved their policy and of supporting PR. But when push comes to shove, in the manifesto negotiations, I honestly don't think PR is going to be the thing that's going to drive them more than anything else. I mean, I think for Unison it'll be settlements over the local authority pension scheme and whether it goes up by 1% or 2% or whatever. That they're going to prioritise the bread and butter issues for their members, and we shouldn't be too surprised about that. But again, I think it's massively important that this watershed moment has happened within the trade unions, and we'll be reaching out to all of them, as our local groups were with all the other progressive organisations in the key seats that we're targeting, to try and build up as many numbers as possible of people who want to put their votes, their activism, and their money into candidates who want to back PR.
Okay, I don't know who this is. JS, ask the question.
Okay. What time was my question? Sorry.
I was 7:27. I can read it out for you if you want.
Yes, go on.
How do you persuade the Labour Party to give way in certain constituencies and not split the progressive vote and stand against a Green or Lib Dem who is more likely to beat the local Tory candidate?
I don't think we are going to persuade the Labour Party to not stand candidates. The Labour Party is never, the only instance of Labour Party not standing a candidate was Tatton in 1997. So that breaks the principle that there has been a moment and a seat where they didn't stand a candidate. They didn't, they were very particular circumstances, and all the major centre-left parties, stood aside for an independent. Now, that may happen in certain circumstances when we're not expecting, despite the fact that we ran a campaign which was ruled out of order, which could be back on the agenda for the next Labour Party conference called Only Stand to Win, saying it should be up to, we wanted to change the rule book of the Labour Party to say it should be up to constituencies to decide whether they stood a candidate. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Labour Party probably will stand candidates in every seat. I think that's ridiculous. If the view of the local party is we'd rather not waste our money and our time and put all of our activism and effort into other seats, and we don't want any danger of splitting the vote at all. I don't think that's likely to happen. So therefore, the job is to make sure that whatever happens, there's an absolute minimal effort, and that everyone piles off, both all of their money and their activism goes to other seats, because there's a real danger, and we're already picking this up on the ground, that a bit like what happened in 2017, people see the Labour Party as the opposition, the alternative, and vote for the alternative, even despite the fact that it's a Green or most likely a Liberal Democrat, who's better placed to win. So, places like St Ives in Cornwall in 2017 and 2019, I think in both those instances, that's a double tragedy. The Liberal Democrats were within a whisker of winning, but the Labour vote was sizable enough because people weren't clear about and disciplined enough to find out who the best placed non-Tory was. Now, how do we make sure that, that everyone's clear, locally who the best placed candidate is, and that's up to us to do it, because I don't think the main parties are going to stand aside for each other. I just don't see that happening. I wish it would happen. And what was really interesting, again in our poll that we did for the report in December, we asked that question: should political parties that broadly agree with each other, progressive parties, work together? 78% said yes. And when we said, should they stand aside for each other, 72% said yes. So the politicians say, this isn't popular, people don't like these deals. But then when you ask the honest, you ask the question, and this is a legitimate proper poll through YouGov, people say they understand how unjust and unfair the political system, the voting system is, and want the parties to collaborate. I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're wrong not to do it. I think they're, because they're scared of the charge of the Conservative Party and the Daily Mail and the Sun that it's some sort of stitch up. They're going to make those charges anyway. And we should be making the case this is a one-off deal in order to change the system so it never has to happen again. But I don't think that's going to work. So I think it is about minimizing the competition as much as possible.
Okay, Dan Staples, about a Tory, supporting a Tory. Dan. Dan Staples? Well, his question was, if outside of the 300 Labour sort of top 300, if a Tory candidate came out for PR, would Win as One support that candidate?
No. We're a progressive good society organisation. It's the same with Reform UK. You've got to be on the kind of progressive wing of politics for us, which makes us different from Make Votes Matter. we are very definitely on the progressive side of politics, and that kind of, we're on the left side. So we're only going to back candidates who are on the left side who want PR as well. So we're not going to back. You won't find any Tories backing PR. They wouldn't be allowed to stand, and they wouldn't be allowed to say they back PR. Reform UK are different, but they're going to I think what's interesting about Reform UK, I can see exactly the same happening that's happened in 2019, that they'll stand candidates everywhere. They'll put enormous amounts of electoral pressure on the Tory party. It will cave into Reform UK's demands, and then the right vote will, solidify, because they're very good at cooperating. They're very good at solidarity, and then they're very good at knowing what side their bread is buttered and working together. It's progressives that are so poor and would rather, some of them divide, and allow themselves to be conquered. But no, we're not going to back any Tory candidates, and we're not going to back any Reform UK candidates.
Okay. Ewan Hoyle, your question at 7:40. Ewan?
Yeah, just wait until I find it.
Okay.
7:40.
Okay.
Yeah, do Labour need their minds focused by a party entirely focused on PR, standing to split their votes in seats beyond their 300th target? So UKIP got their way on Europe. Does PR need a UKIP equivalent?
Yeah, I can. Hi, you. Nice to be on a call with you. I can see that. I don't think the PR movement is at that stage yet. I don't think it's going to happen yet. And I think most of us are still in the kind of let's try and find everything short of that. And remember that, if you want to read any political biography, read Crick's biography of Farage. It's absolutely brilliant in terms of, how long and how persistent, he was in terms of building UKIP and the Brexit party. I don't think we're at that stage yet. But if all else fails, then eventually, someone's going to do that. But it's got to be done. It's got to be done with enough force and pressure to make it work in the way that effectively UKIP did around the European issue. But I'm just saying that that's long, hard yards of work to do, and it's nowhere near going to be ready. Even if someone wanted to do that, they're not going to get that up and running for the next election.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ewan. A question then from just 1 second here. Oh, sorry. Darren Higgins, should we work with the Reform Party to see PR introduced? That's your question. I'll just read that for you.
I've already answered that in effect, Alan. That we won't be working with Reform UK. I think it's right and proper that Make Votes Matter, who are an all-party group, work with all the parties and all the politicians who support PR. We want PR because we want a good society, which is a kind of very progressive, very centre-left, egalitarian view of the kind of world that we want to create. So we're not the same animal as Make Votes Matter, who are a single issue. We just want to get PR. We're in a different, an aligned, very close, but different position, that we want PR because we want a particular type of society, and we're making that case. So we're a different organisation. So we won't be working with Reform UK, but I understand the reasons why Make Votes Matter would do.
I just have a question now, Neil. Are you worried? It could happen in any party, but I think it most likely would happen in the Labour Party, that if a Labour Party activist in somewhere decided to, in fact, campaign under the Win as One banner for a Lib Dem candidate, that they might be expelled or suspended from the Labour Party by supporting the enemy?
Well, I mean, this is the ridiculous position of our politics, the complete dishonesty of, thousands of Labour Party members who vote for other parties because it's pragmatic and sensible to do, or even might donate locally or whatever else. Our political system, our electoral system demands really that you do that, and so many people do. And then you've got these archaic kind of rules that say that, you know, you can't publicly say what you're doing in private. And as soon as we need to get rid of that for once over. And as soon as we've got PR, you can always vote for the candidate you want and know that your vote counts. I think people are going to have to play it as carefully as they want to, in terms of what they do in private and what they say in public. I guess, you know, our ambition, if it can happen, is that in effect, you know, so many people come out and say, and this will be driven, look, let's be honest, all of this is going to be driven by the polls. If Labour maintain a 20% lead, then it's job done. The Labour Party is going to win a majority. You don't need any tactical voting. You know, none of this will be necessary. If the polls close quite a bit, and they don't have to close that much. Remember, Labour needs a lead of 12% to get a majority of 1, right? Because of how badly the electoral system treats the Labour Party and how badly their votes are distributed. As soon as you go below that point, you're into hung parliament territory. If we're into that territory and the thought is another Tory term is possible, I think you're in the realm where lots and lots and lots of people are going to say, look, you know, we can't allow this to happen again. We've got to get greater collaboration nationally and locally. And in that circumstances, I can imagine, you know, lots and lots of people saying, you know, they're going to do this. And, you know, they're not going to vote for the party they belong to. They're going to vote for another party tactically on a one-off basis. If that happened on a mass scale, you know, what is the Labour Party machine going to do? Are they going to kick all of those people out? Maybe they will. But I don't think, you know, you may not end up with much of a Labour Party, and you may end up with another Tory government. I go back to, because a calculation about some people, I think there's some people would rather lose the next election than never have PR. I honestly believe there are some people in the Labour Party whose attitude is that. They're bringing competition into the system, and the Labour Party losing its kind of guaranteed second place in a 2-horse race is the worst thing that could ever happen. And I think the worst thing that could happen is another Tory government, and not to get to change our political system. And it's kind of, you know, how much do you believe that, and how much you're prepared to put your neck on the line in order to make that happen.
Okay, we're starting to sort of wind down. Jeff Gibbons, you had a question early on. You were worried about the Greens, and I still think this is an important question. I invited several leading Greens to our discussion tonight. I don't see them here because they sort of regard this win as one as a kind of bit of a stitch up between Stammer and Davey, and they feel left out in the cold. And Jeff, you had a question about that. Are you there, Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. You answered some of this, Neil, but I do wonder if you take the top 10 Green Party seats, whoever's running the tactical voting site or sites, do you think they are going to make a recommendation in certain seats that are in the Green target list?
I think as I said, I think there's wiggle room on the straight numbers of second last time. On that strict basis, you wouldn't do. But I think there is such an injustice to the Green Party that there could be ways of, you know, bending that and moving around it in order to find ways of helping the Green Party. And I've kind of said that, you know, are they third or fourth in a place that neither Labour or Liberal Democrats really care about? You know, and so could they be prioritised in that place, or is there, you know, this? I mean, I don't know yet. I'm quite intrigued by this Bristol Central seat. The Greens, you know, could well make the case for, you know, their council vote, you know, et cetera, and that they would be the leading ones. I don't know. We don't know exactly what the boundary changes are going to kind of, you know, actually deliver on and what they're going to be. But I think we have to look creatively at all of that stuff, you know, and think about, as I say, the injustice, and try and work our way through so that the Green Party's helped somewhere, somehow.
There's been several questions asked about what type of PR system we should, Neil should be, you know, should winners one being saying, you know, we want this system, that system, etc. He doesn't think that should be the focus of win as one. I'll tell you, we're going to go on back on that question tomorrow, actually. I think on the Get PR Done Facebook group, because some people think that we can't really support campaign for PR unless we say the specifics of what campaign what type of PR we want. And that's, it is a view. It's not my view, but I think the priority must be on campaigning. And we do relatively little of that. We're right in the midst of the biggest strike wave for many years, decades. And where's the PR vote? Where's the campaign for PR to intervene? No other pro-PR group considers intervening in these strikes in the leaflet saying, the situation. Anyways, Ruth Hubbard had a question from Sheffield. Ruth. Ruth Hubbard? Well, her question is,
hi, Alan.
Oh, sure, Ruth, go for it.
I thought you were just going to read it out. Hi, I was late on the call, but I wondered if there'd been any talk yet of the importance of PR for local elections in England, and as a potential stepping stone, 2, to prepare people for a different kind of politics, and 3, as a way of involving more people at a local community level to think about this stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I'm not sure what I think about that, really. I mean, obviously, I think PR should be the system that we elect representatives, whether that's in a revised second chamber, whether that's locally, or whether that's nationally for Westminster. What I definitely don't want, is to have PR everywhere except the chamber, which really matters. And I think that's the danger of both a democratically elected second chamber and for local government, and they shouldn't be distractions, because we know in our system what's the place that really matters. And now that may be wrong. Maybe the proof of the pudding is you do it locally and people find out that it's okay and it can work, and therefore you build it up from that. I find it quite hard to think, my instinct, because it's quite hard to prove what the best route is for PR nationally, is probably that we go for, the House of Commons, first, to make that a priority. That may be wrong. I couldn't convincingly say, but I think that's where the energy and the vitality is. We'll see, but I'm obviously not opposed to PR for local government or for a revised second chamber.
This is just a moment to do a little plug for a group called Councils for PR, which our group GetPRDone has been working on with Make Votes Matter, which is in fact to get local councils to come on board for PR at Westminster. Because let's face it, folks, even if you convince the local council they want to have PR in the local elections, they can't do that. That can only decided at Westminster. So we must do the system like in Scotland. First of all, they got PR at Holyrood, and then they moved to PR in local council elections in Scotland. And that's really, I think, the problem is that you could never win Manchester City Council over to PR the local elections, because Labour would immediately lose 30 seats. I mean, it's they have like 98% of the seats in Manchester, but they only get like 66% of the vote. It's like really pretty outrageous. Okay, I think we've just about come to the end. There's lots more questions, and I'd just like to wrap it up. Thank you, Katie, for your very good questions, and thank you, Neal. And we're planning on keep on going on this campaign. And so why don't we wrap it up there? And if anyone wants to stay around for a little while, well, the late hangers on can sit around and gab for a while. Okay.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for the questions, Katie. Thanks for the questions, everybody else. Lovely to see you.
Right.
Keep going. It's really important you'll keep going. You're doing great things.
Okay, we'll try.
Take care. Lovely to see you all.
Right.